Okay, hello. So, welcome. This is video 3, and today I will be discussing passages that I found particularly to be interesting in chapters 6 and 11 in writing analytically. So, let's start. Okay. So, the first passage that I found to be very intriguing to me specifically, it was on page 141, and it was underneath the Fortune Cookie School of Interpretation. And it starts with adherents of the Fortune Cookie School of Interpretation look solely for clues pointing to the hidden message, and having found these clues, discard the rest like the cookie in a Chinese restaurant once the fortune has been extracted. And then there's a bunch of other things that it says, but I'll skip right to the end, and it says, things don't just mean in some simple and clear way for all people in all situations. They always mean within a network of beliefs from a particular point of view. The person who claims to have access to some universal truth beyond context and point of view is either naive, unaware, or worse, a bully, insisting that his or her view of the world is obviously correct and must be accepted by everyone. And I would just like to say that first, I found it to be very interesting how they use the fortune cookie reference, because it's such a prevalent practice, I would say, to when you, for example, get a fortune cookie, you read the message and then what do? You usually throw it out because they give you a lot in the bag when you order. So I found that to be interesting how they use something personal to connect the writer and the reader in that sense. And I just wanted to add that I found this particular passage to be interesting because it was interesting how we were going essentially back to this idea that meaning is not everything. It is not what we're trying to get at. We are trying to look where the writer went, how they got there, the whole discovery process. We're going back to this whole idea that we have to look beyond the meaning and more into the words, into the way why they use this particular punctuation and things like that. So that's why I particularly liked reading this. And even in Nietzsche's essay on truth and lies in a non-moral sense, he mentioned the example with the bird and the insect, and how this is a flaw in man, that man is selfish and only wishes to see the world in their point of view. They cannot see the point of view out of the point of view of another living thing. That's what he said in his essay, and I found that connection to be particularly interesting as well. And then later on in chapter 11, I found another good passage that I particularly liked reading too. This was on page 232, and it started with, in good analytical writing, especially in the early investigatory stages of writing and thinking, the thesis not only directs the writer's way of looking at evidence, the analysis of evidence should also direct and redirect, bring about revision of the thesis. I especially liked how he said redirect and direct, because we immediately focus to the image of the camera and how we adjust the camera lens when we're trying to focus on a particular image that we're taking a picture of. And then he says at the end, even in a final draft, writers are usually fine-tuning their governing idea in response to their analysis of evidence. And yeah, this was in... Hold on, sorry, quick note. I just remembered that writing analytically has 2 authors, so it's not a he. There's 2 authors. And this passage I found under the reciprocal relationship between thesis and evidence, the thesis as lens. And I would just like to point out that I especially liked how even when they used the phrase such as fine-tuning, you think of tuning, for example, this is what I thought of tuning a guitar, looking back at it. And I especially enjoyed the way that they described the process of making the thesis as it's difficult, it's complicated. Just like when you're taking a picture, you have to constantly readjust the lens. You have to make sure that the particular object that you're taking a picture of is framed right. Everything has to be not perfect, but it has to be presentable. It has to be something worthy, in a sense. That's what I meant. And I related all of this back to some examples that I found in Nietzsche's essay, when you can see an opposition going on, the way at first he would be criticizing man, but then at the same time he would point out some of the things he liked about it. And some of the quotes that I found to support this were, "They are deeply immersed in illusions and in dream images." He's talking about man in this. This was page 80. And he says, "Their eyes merely glide over the surface of things and see forms." Even in the next page, on page 81, he says, "Thus, even at this stage, what they hate is basically not deception itself, but rather the unpleasant, hated consequences of certain sorts of deception." And yes, so he was criticizing man in these two passages. But then later on page 85, he started with, "Here one may certainly admire man as a mighty genius of construction, who succeeds in piling up an infinitely compiled dome of concepts upon an unstable foundation, and as it were on running water." And then later on he says, "In this he is greatly to be admired, but not on account for his drive for truth or for pure knowledge of things." So in here we see his evolution of ideas. His thoughts are changing. Not only is he changing his claim, but he's also changing up his thought process. So we sort of see this discovery point where he's seeing more about himself. He says, "Oh, yeah, man has all of these flaws too, but here are some good points about it." And then at the end, he kind of goes back to criticizing man a little bit too. But we see this evolution going on. We see he's changing his opinions and his ideas to not only support his thesis, but he's also showing evidence that goes against it too. And I like that idea especially because in the text before, it was talking about when your thesis has to be supported strongly too, by not only strong evidence that supports it, but strong contradicting evidence as well. And those are the ideas that I wanted to acknowledge today. The concept that writing has to allow complications to enter. It has to allow problems to be introduced, real problems. They can't be made up, set up problems like they mentioned earlier before. They have to challenge your beliefs, but they also have to guide you in this new, different way where you're not only going to make your writing better, but you're going to make your thought process clear as well. And yeah, those are the passages that I wanted to share for today, and that's it. Thank you for watching.